Hey everyone, it's Alice, and I'm here today to share some tips on beating reading slumps. So if you're a regular watcher of this channel, you will know that over the last couple of weeks/months I've been in a bad reading slump. I've gone from reading like 20 or 30 books a month to reading one in a month at the very most. And I'm starting to get out of it now, so I'm beginning to think about ways that I can avoid it happening in the future, ways that if I feel myself start slipping into that state again, that I might be able to get myself out of it a bit faster. And I thought that I would brainstorm some ideas here with you today, just in case you're in a reading slump and you need some advice. And also for future me, because when I get into my next reading slump, I can be like, hey, didn't past me have some advice? And past me will be like, sup, I'm here with some advice. So future me will have less of a reading slump and I will thank myself later. So it's going to be a good time, hopefully. I haven't worked out how many tips I'm going to give you because I'm basically just going to brainstorm as I go. But I just thought it could be a valuable video for all of us, because who amongst us has never experienced a reading slump? I bet it's very, very few people. These tips will mostly be aimed towards like booktubers, book tweeters, bookstagrammers, book bloggers, because that's who I am as a person. So I know what it's like to approach reading as though it's a job when you're not actually getting paid for it, and it's a little bit unrewarding sometimes. But these tips will apply to everybody. So my major tip that I'm only beginning to embrace myself is the power of the reread. So I used to be really anti-reread. I would constantly reread Red Rising because I just love it, and every time I reread it I would feel so guilty because I could be reading other books, but I justified it by saying, well, there's a new installment out and I want to refresh myself on the events of the previous books, I want to familiarise myself with these characters, and I couldn't just reread it for fun. I would have to reread it for a reason. Now I'm starting to realise that actually rereading for fun is a good thing. If you know there's a book that you've really enjoyed, then not only will you be able to read it pretty quickly because you've already read it once, you can almost disconnect your brain a little bit and just go with the flow of the story. You'll pick up things the second time around that you missed the first time around, so you'll be able to appreciate the foreshadowing and more aspects of the artist's craft rather than just the story. And also, like, if it's a book that you've enjoyed the first time, you'll enjoy it again. It will cheer you up. You might feel more inspired to read more things. So at the moment, I'm rereading Call Down the Hawk by Maggie Stiefvater. I can remember enough of it that I probably could have just dived straight into Mr. Impossible, but Call Down the Hawk was a 5-star read that I read very quickly and I enjoyed it a lot. And I'm really enjoying sinking back into the world of this story, and it means that I will appreciate Mr. Impossible a lot more because I'm already in that headspace when I pick it up. So that's another tip to get out of a reading slump. Don't force yourself to pick up a sequel that you feel like you're really excited about or you have to read if you can't remember the events of the first book and you think it's going to be a bit of a hassle to try and get back into it. Because sometimes I think I had this problem with Red Tigress. I couldn't really remember what had happened at the end of Blood Heir, but I'd only read it 4 or 5 months before, so I didn't reread it, and I put off reading Red Tigress until I didn't feel like I wanted to reread Blood Heir anymore, but I could have just reread Blood Heir. Instead, I forced my way through the sequel. It took me about a quarter of the book to actually remember who all of the characters were, refamiliarise myself with the world. If I'd reread Blood Heir, I might have enjoyed it more the next time. So I think I'm going to become one of those people that rereads books fairly regularly if I can't remember the events of the first book. And it just helps yourself if you're not forcing your way through something that you're having a bit of a struggle with. It's an easy way of making sure that you're not going to have that struggle. Another tip is just don't force yourself through books in general. If you're not enjoying something, put it down, put it to one side. Don't necessarily DNF it. I am very, very hesitant DNFer, but just say to yourself, I'll get to this later. I only realised earlier this week that Sean and I read The Eye of the World, The Wheel of Time. No, that's not book 2. Why do I always do that? The Eye of the World, The Great Hunt and The Dragon Reborn in 2020. Which means we didn't finish any Wheel of Time books last year. We didn't finish a single Robert Dorman book last year. We've been planning on reading one a month, so we would have already had the series rounded out by now. But we started The Shadow Rising, we were trying to force our way through it wasn't happening, so we just put it down to one side. At the beginning of December, Sean said, I'd like to try The Shadow Rising again, so we picked it up. We're only reading a few pages at a time, but we're both really enjoying it. We're starting to pick up speed on it a little bit, so we might go from reading like 5 pages in a day to reading 20 pages in a day. And at the end of the day, it's all reading and it's all progress. And it doesn't matter if you're reading one sentence or one book in a day. If you're reading and it's something that you enjoy doing, it's worth doing. So it might take us a year for each book, and we might not finish the Wheel of Time series for another decade. But as long as we enjoy the journey, does it really matter when we reach the conclusion? Not really. Any more advice I can think of? Not to feel obligated to read books. So everybody's talking about the newest hyped release, and you're like, woohoo, I'm really hyped for that too. This would probably be Empire of the Vampire for me. I ordered 3 copies. Woohoo! So excited to get to it. And then the hype just got too much for me. And then I was going to force my way through it. But I knew if I tried to force my way through it, I wouldn't enjoy it. So I have not picked it up yet. When I do pick it up, I will hopefully really, really enjoy it because I do have lots of copies. But if I don't, it's not my fault if I don't enjoy the book. You don't have to enjoy every book. You don't have to love all of the books that you anticipate. You don't have to love all of your 5-star predictions. Sometimes it might be an author's writing style, or it might be the characters, or it might be something that happens in the plot that you just don't gel with, and that's okay. But sometimes I blame myself, which I know is stupid and it's counterintuitive because I didn't write the bloody book. But sometimes I think, oh, am I being too harsh on this? Is it because I've read too many books that are similar? Am I just in a cynical mood? Am I being too critical? So I blame myself for not enjoying the book. But I think if you can just actually embrace the fact that, like, sometimes books are hyped, you don't have to read them straight away, and you might not necessarily love them, then it means you'll be less intimidated by picking them up. You won't slump because you won't feel like, well, if I'm not reading that book, I won't bother reading any books because everybody's reading that book. So that will help too. I'd also say just aim to read like a tiny little bit every day, because before, Sean and I were aiming to read 3 chapters of The Shadow Rising every day. So if we didn't get those 3 chapters, I felt really bummed out. And then the next day we tried to read 4 chapters. And if we haven't read 3 chapters on one day, why the hell are we going to be able to read 4 chapters the next day? So then the day after that, we'd be trying to read 6 chapters. And it was a never-ending struggle, and it constantly felt like a chore. At the moment, we're not setting any constraints on ourselves. We're not even trying to aim to read 1 chapter a day. If we read half a chapter, then we'll just finish that chapter the next day. It's fine. It might take us triple the length of time. It might take us 6 times the length of time. As I said, as long as you're reading, as long as you're enjoying reading, as long as it doesn't feel like a chore, it's fine. Probably the most valuable piece of advice would be don't treat reading like a job. Unless you're actually being paid for it. If you work in publishing, fine, whatever. If you actually get paid to do like copy editing, proofreading, any of those kinds of things, then fair enough. You are definitely going to need to read. I'm really sorry if you're slumping, but I don't have much advice for you other than the facts that I've already kind of given. But for book bloggers out there, don't treat reading like it's a job. Because there were times when I was working 8 hours at work and I would come home and I would force myself to read for like 6 hours, and then I'd get up early and read for like 2 hours. Because I was thinking, if I'm reading 8 hours at work, then if I'm working 8 hours, then I need to be reading for 8 hours, because that is also work, because I want to eventually monetize it and I would like to do this as my career path. That's not a good way of thinking. Yes, some book bloggers are monetized. Some book bloggers are able to just solely do book blogging or booktubing, or just do that as their career because they make enough money. But for the majority of us, that won't happen. I know that that's like, you're not aiming high enough. Reach for the moon, and even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. Like, no, I'm being realistic. 95% at least of us will never be able to use this as a full paying career, because it's like ridiculously hard. And also, like, people, I think, sometimes forget how much money you need to live, like mortgage and council tax and food and petrol and internet and heating and water. Like, everything costs a lot. And if you're trying to do something like YouTube as a full career, like full-time career, you need to be one of the very lucky few. And I think sometimes, especially in the book community, people seem to think that, like, oh, well, if I'm reading a lot, then I should be getting that monetary reward as well. And yeah, that would be great if it worked like that, but unfortunately it doesn't. The way I try and think about it is, okay, like, I might pay out money for the blog and I might not get any money back, but I do get review copies through, and if I would buy each of those books full price, it would be like £16-17. So if I get 8 or 9 review copies in a year, then that has nullified the cost of the blog. So if you try and think of it more like that, it might help you slump less, because you won't be thinking, I need to push myself until I'm at breaking point. I need to read 20 hours out of the 24 hours of the day just so that I can try and get monetized. Like, just take it chill. If you get monetized, you get monetized. If you can make money from reading, then it will happen. But you don't have to kill yourself to do it. Like, you don't have to push yourself until you're at breaking point. You don't have to burn out. Because reading's meant to be fun, and it's meant to be something that people do to relax, and it's meant to be a hobby rather than a career. And I think too many people try to change hobbies into things that they can get money for, because they might not like retail, or they might like office work, and they don't like the traditional career path in front of them. So they think, well, I really love doing my hobby, so I'll try and make that into my career. And that's really admirable, but I think sometimes it's best not to put all of your eggs into that basket, because it can cause a hell of a lot of mental stress. Because I've had that for years and years, when I've been like, I'm going to do this full time, I'm going to eventually quit my job, and I'm just going to do this. And look, I've been doing it for 8 years, and I haven't managed to make a single penny from this thing. That's fine. I'm okay with that now. And if you can also come to terms with that and be okay with that, then it will be better for you. And this is why I should have planned this video a bit more, because it's kind of moved from tips to beat a reading slump to life advice with Alyce, but it still helps me to beat my reading slumps, so it might help you to beat yours. So, long story short, read a little bit every day if you can, but also don't beat yourself up if you can't read anything one day. Don't make yourself feel bad for it, because that will just make you slump more. If you have a day not reading, just think, well, today I went for a lovely long walk, or I cleaned my kitchen, or I reorganised my bookshelves. Like, you don't have to be reading every single day to be a bookworm. You're still a bookworm. Even if you only read one book in a year, even if you only read one page in a year, like, that's still cool. I still think that's cool, because a lot of people out there are really proud of the fact that they don't read, and I think that's weird. But then that's because obviously reading's basically 95% of my personality, so I would have no personality at all if I didn't read, so that would be awkward. But yeah, read books that you're excited about. Don't force yourself to read books that other people are excited about just because other people are excited about them, because that's silly. Try to just be kinder to yourself, and I think at the end of the day, that's the best thing that you can do. If you let yourself have some time off, if you let yourself have a bit of a break, then you'll likely feel like reading and feel in a better place, and you might end up picking up new books or finding new favourites that you would have hated if you pushed yourself through them. Because I think this is probably one of the reasons that I struggled to get into fantasy so much at the beginning of my bookish journey, because I was trying to read lots and lots of books very quickly because I wanted to catch up. I hadn't read for 5 or 6 years. I had a massive reading slump, and I literally was reading like 2 books a year, basically all through my secondary school experience. And then when I was in sixth form, I started reading again, and I was trying to force myself to read hundreds of books that I'd missed out on that I was so excited to pick up because I wanted to know what all the hype was about. But it meant I didn't appreciate books like Lord of the Rings because they were slow and dreary, and I struggled with Edgar Allan Poe because it was like, well, it's short stories, but it's such a lot of short stories. But really, when I waited, like, I read this big chunker, I read it in a month because I waited until I was really, really excited to read Edgar Allan Poe stories. Was like, I'll just read a couple a day. And then I ended up reading, I think it was like 3 a day. So I read it in a month. And I'd been literally picking this up and struggling with it all through sixth form. I was reading like a page a day, and it was a ball ache, and I hated it. And then I waited quite literally, oh my god, I read this in 2020, so I waited 6 years, and then I picked this up, and I thought it was such a valuable collection, and I loved so many of the short stories, and I really enjoyed it. And I would probably say that Edgar Allan Poe is one of my favourite authors now because of how amazing his short stories are. And before, I just thought, like, that's really boring. I struggled to get through. I think I only managed to read either 2 or 3 of the short stories, and I had it out at the school library for the entire year. And I read it in a month. So if you just stop beating yourself up, stop trying to force yourself to do silly things in a short span of time, because, like, it doesn't matter how quickly you read it, as long as you eventually read it. And that's why I've got so many unread books on my TBR. That's why I'm struggling with my NetGalley so much, because I've got so many of them, and I'm like, I'll just read them eventually. But if you can get into that mindset, then the slump will just dissipate itself. Hopefully. Because a lot of the thing about slumping is that it's like that mental block, because you're trying to force yourself to do it and your brain won't let you do it because it doesn't want to be forced. So you want to do the thing but your brain doesn't want to. So if you could just stop wanting to do the thing, your brain will be like, hey, come back, I want to do that thing now. And hopefully these tips will help you get into that state where you're just a bit more relaxed and not trying to do 300, 400, 700 books in a year, because I feel like sometimes that's what I want to do. I could happily read 2 books in a day if I had the time for that. But at the moment, reading 2 pages in a day is good enough for me. I'm still going to try to do 10% a day, but I've been kind to myself by setting myself 10% a day because I'm letting it be across any books. So if I'm reading a short book that's only 100 pages, then I only have to read 10 pages that day. If I'm reading a long book that's 1,000 pages and I feel like reading 100 pages in a day, then I can still get 10% easily. But I can play around with it a bit more. So also flexible goals. That will be my last piece of advice for you. Set yourself flexible goals. Don't say I have to read 100 pages in a day. Say like you have to read 10% or you have to read a chapter of a book, because then you can pick and choose from books. Reading multiple books at one time also something that helped. Because if you're reading things in a few different genres, like a romance book, a horror book, and a children's book, they feel stylistically so different that you can easily separate out the stories in your mind so you don't get bamboozled. And then whatever you're in the mood for, you can just pick and choose. So if you're in the mood for something a bit heavier, you can go for the horror. If you want something a bit easier to read, you can go for the children's. If you want something a bit light and fluffy, then you can go for the romance. And by having those options, you don't feel forced into a corner like I can only read the book that I'm reading. You can play around with it a bit more and do what you want to do. So that is all the rambling and advice I'm going to give you today. If you have any tips for reading slumps, please leave them down in the comments, because I could always use more. Hopefully this video will help at least somebody, because I just feel like it's me rambling for like 15 minutes. But fingers crossed, if you can get something valuable out of it. I definitely think it's helped me to brainstorm a bit more and to feel a bit more like I'm in control of my reading slump rather than just letting my brain decide whether I'm reading willy-nilly, because that's what it feels like most of the time. I do actually have a quick surprise unboxing for you, because a parcel arrived and I haven't opened it yet. So I'll just go and grab my box, because what's more fun than ending a video by showing off a fancy new book that's arrived from Fairy Loot. I've ordered too many things from Fairy Loot and I have no idea what this is, which makes it extra fun. Another quick piece of advice actually before I unbox this: don't replace reading with buying books, because I feel like because I was reading less last year, I was buying a lot more. It's not the same thing. There's that quote that says that some people are book readers and some people are book collectors. I'm definitely both, but yeah, it definitely feels like when you're not reading, you end up buying more. So try not to do that, because then you get more overwhelmed with how many books are in your house that you haven't read, and they're all staring at me. They're all staring. She says before opening another book that she hasn't read yet. Da 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 da. Fairy Loot. Ooh, it's pink. Oh, I know what it is. It's How Violent Ends by Chloe Gong. This is the sequel to These Violent Delights, which I still haven't read. But that's okay, because I'll read it eventually. And it is signed. And it has under the dust jacket artwork, because it's Fairy Loot and it's pretty. So hopefully eventually I'll read this too. Hopefully, maybe, but possibly not. That's okay though. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like. If you'd like to subscribe, we'd be super duper grateful. We post new videos every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday, so I will see you in a couple of days with another video. Hopefully less rambly. Maybe, but probably not. It's me, let's be honest. I'm quite a rambly person. Thank you for watching. Bye!